There's a potato growing wild across half of America that tastes better than anything you'll find in a store. It doesn't need fertilizer. It doesn't need irrigation. And it's been feeding people for over 10,000 years. Native children once called it underground candy. Gold Rush miners swore it saved their lives. And foragers still whisper about its flavor like it's some kind of myth. So why have you never seen it in your grocery store? Why has a superfood more nutritious than modern potatoes been erased from our plates, and from our memories? The answer has nothing to do with taste, and everything to do with power, profit, and control. Long before store shelves and seed catalogs, there was Spring Beauty, a plant so deeply woven into the fabric of survival that entire civilizations relied on it. Native American tribes like the Algonquin, Iroquois, and Thompson didn't just eat it, they built traditions around it. They roasted it, pit-baked it, flavored it with wild herbs, and even gave it to children as a treat because of its rich, sweet taste. It was more than food, it was culture. During the gold rush, desperate miners trapped in the wilderness turned to Spring Beauty when rations ran out. It was said to be the only thing standing between them and starvation. Foraging legend Euell Gibbons became so obsessed he ate it twice a day for weeks, and joked that his friends were worried he'd go into withdrawal when the season ended. But here's where the story takes a strange turn. Despite its life-saving legacy, unrivaled flavor, and deep cultural roots, Spring Beauty was quietly erased from our food system. Why? Because something else had just arrived, a foreign potato carrying something far more powerful than nutrition. Every spring, a silent miracle unfolds in the forests of eastern North America. Just as the last frost melts and before the trees fully leaf out, the ground comes alive, blanketed by delicate, pink-striped flowers. They open with the morning sun and vanish by nightfall, blooming for only a few short weeks before disappearing completely. Most hikers walk right past them, never realizing what's buried just inches beneath the soil. But the real treasure isn't what's above ground. Hidden below, 3 to 5 inches deep, are small, marble-like tubers. To the untrained eye, they look like nothing. But to those who know, they're gold. Called Spring Beauty corns, these tubers are sweet, creamy, and packed with nutrients modern potatoes can't touch. Rich in vitamins A and C, brimming with potassium, magnesium, calcium, and iron, they aren't just food, they're fuel. One scientific study even found they contain double the digestible sugars of industrial potatoes, meaning faster, cleaner energy with far less cooking time. Raw, they snap like a radish. Cooked, they melt like roasted chestnut. Euell Gibbons, the forager who wrote the literal book on wild eating, called them the definitive tater tot. And once you've tasted them, you'll understand why native tribes considered them delicacies and why children once dug them up as woodland candy. But despite their nutrition, abundance, and flavor, these tubers would be quietly replaced by an outsider. And not because it was better. In the spring of 1719, a ship docked in New Hampshire carrying something seemingly ordinary, tubers from Derry, Ireland. But these weren't just potatoes. They were imperial cargo, backed by centuries of colonial agriculture, global trade, and the mindset of domination. They had traveled a strange loop, from the Andes to Europe, then to Ireland, and now back to the continent that had its own native potatoes for thousands of years. And that's when the quiet erasure began. The Irish potato didn't need to be better, it just needed to be profitable. It could be planted in uniform rows. It could be harvested by machines. It could be stored in root cellars for months and shipped across state lines. And most importantly, it could be standardized, controlled, and commodified. Spring Beauty didn't stand a chance. Within decades, this wild, nutrient-rich native potato was pushed aside, not because it failed to feed people, but because it refused to fit the industrial mold. It was too small. Too wild. Too independent. By the mid-1800s, the Irish potato had completely overrun its native counterpart. And just like that, one of the most nutritious, sustainable, and culturally significant crops in North America vanished from the table. But here's where the story gets even more absurd. We didn't just replace spring beauty. We traded down. On the surface, the excuse sounds reasonable. Spring beauty is too small. Too deep. You can't harvest it with machines. It doesn't last in storage. That's the story we were sold. But look closer, and you'll see the lie. Spring beauty grows in massive, dense stands that carpet entire forest floors. A skilled forager can gather double handfuls in just an hour. Indigenous peoples have been harvesting them efficiently for thousands of years, without tractors, without chemicals, and without any need for warehouses or shipping logistics. The real issue? Spring beauty couldn't be controlled. European agriculture, especially the industrial version we inherited, is built on domination. It needs year-round availability. Identical crops. Patents. Centralized supply chains. A wild plant that blooms for 3 weeks and disappears. That's a nightmare for corporate farming. You can't patent spring beauty. You can't create a seed monopoly around it. You can't sell fertilizer or pesticides for a crop that thrives without them. The Irish potato, on the other hand, played by all the rules. It could be shaped, stored, processed. It bent to the system. By the 1950s and 60s, the food industry stopped even pretending to care about nutrition. At research stations across North America, scientists began talking about potatoes not as food, but as raw material for the deep fryer. Flavor? Irrelevant. Nutrients? Optional. What mattered was whether it could be cut, frozen, and fried into uniform French fries. That shift didn't just bury spring beauty. It buried entire food cultures. And the effects? We're still living with them. But while the system was building its empire of flavorless starch, the wild potato never stopped growing. And now, the industry wants it back. Right now, global food systems are in panic mode. Droughts, pests, soil collapse, billions of dollars are being poured into laboratories to genetically engineer crops that can survive a future we helped create. Scientists are desperately trying to breed climate-resistant potatoes that don't need irrigation, that can handle heat, that won't rot in storage. But while they tinker in white coats, spring beauty is already doing it. And it has been for 10,000 years. This native potato thrives in forest soil. It self-seeds. It doesn't need synthetic fertilizers. It survives winter without a greenhouse. And once it takes root, it expands, covering entire woodlands with little effort. It doesn't and oppose, just grow, it multiplies. Its cousin in the American Southwest, the Four Corners potato, makes modern tubers look like a joke. It has twice the protein, calcium, magnesium, and iron of an organic red potato. And a single plant? It can produce up to 600 offspring in just 4 months. And here's the twist of the knife: the very corporations that once dismissed these wild crops as useless, are now circling back. Quietly studying their genetics. Eyeing them not as food, but as intellectual property. Because when control slips through their fingers, the solution isn't humility, it's rebranding. But there and oppose, a problem. The people who've preserved these plants through war, colonization, and erasure. They're not so quick to forget. For over 10,000 years, indigenous communities were the quiet guardians of spring beauty. They didn't just eat it, they cultivated it, revered it, built stories, songs, and survival around it. It wasn't a product. It was a relationship. A sacred exchange between people and the land. But colonization didn't just take land, it erased the knowledge that made living on that land sustainable. The crops that had once fed entire civilizations were branded primitive. The people who knew how to grow and harvest them were pushed aside. And the food systems that replaced them, built on the illusion of progress, while destroying the very seeds that had sustained humanity for millennia. Now, after centuries of neglect and dismissal, corporate interests are creeping back, eyeing the genetics of these ancient plants, because we're not just talking about tubers in the dirt. We're talking about stolen futures. About ecosystems of wisdom that were nearly wiped out, only now to be mined for profit by the same forces that once declared them worthless. And still, spring beauty endures. Quiet. Wild. Waiting. But the question isn't whether it will return. It's whether we're worthy of remembering. Every spring, like clockwork, they return. The pale pink blossoms of spring beauty ripple across forest floors like a whispered memory. They open only for a few hours a day, for a few weeks a year, and then vanish. To most, they're just pretty flowers. A brief sign of the season. But to those who remember, they're ghosts. Silent reminders of a feast the world forgot. Spring beauty still grows abundantly. In every county of Illinois alone, it carpets the woods. But you're not allowed to harvest it. In many places, foraging it is considered controversial. It's been rebranded as a protected wildflower, not a food. You'll find it in conservation lists, not farmers' markets. No seed packets. No grocery store shelves. No nutrition labels. It's not that it can't feed us. It's that we built a system where food must be predictable, controlled, and profitable. And spring beauty? It answers to no one. It refuses to be boxed, farmed, or patented. So now, it lives in limbo, a crop without a place. A superfood labeled irrelevant. A treasure buried beneath our feet while we line up for potatoes shipped in from thousands of miles away. Most people pass it by without a second glance. But for a few, the ones who still remember, those tiny flowers might as well be neon signs flashing from the soil. I'm still here. We didn't lose spring beauty because it failed us. We lost it because it couldn't be bought. It couldn't be harvested with machines. It couldn't be trademarked, warehoused, or forced into 12-month distribution cycles. It bloomed when it was ready. It offered itself freely, but only to those who were paying attention. And that's what makes it dangerous in a world built on scarcity. The story of spring beauty isn't just about a forgotten potato. It's about the price we pay when we trade nourishment for convenience, culture for control, and abundance for uniformity. It's about a wild, untamed flavor that dared to survive, and a society that walked right past it. But it's still out there. Every April, it blooms again. Delicate. Defiant. Waiting to be remembered. So the next time you're walking through the woods and see a carpet of pink flowers stretching toward the sun, pause. You might be standing on a forgotten feast, a piece of ancestral wisdom still pulsing beneath the soil. Because some foods are too wild to farm. Some flavors are too good to forget. And some treasures are still waiting, right beneath your feet.